Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Capability Accelerator program session. And today we start our pitching and presentation series. And as one would expect, is quite apt for us to kick off with pitching for success. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet. And for me, this is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I also extend this respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Straits Islanders peoples who may be joining us in today's webinar. I'm Collins Rex. I'm the Victoria Met's Export Hub lead, and I'll be your host for today's session. And I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our speaker to you. Our speaker today is Dave Yates, who is a forward thinker, a strategist, and an architect of change. Dave has individually coached over 300 business leaders in the mining, engineering, technology and services sector all over Australia. And he's adept at how enterprises and mining operations engage with their future workforce, digital transformations, disruption and growth. Dave focuses on enterprise architecture, innovation and growth. He stretches strategy, and he's also focused on navigating complexity and growing processes to be more value-oriented, purposeful and stable in a complex and changing world. Now, Dave will be joining us in a moment, and just so that you have a sense of how the proceedings will work today, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them throughout the presentation in the Q&A box, and we'll take all the questions at the end. But please don't wait before you type it because you might forget. So keep them rolling, and Dave will answer any questions at the end of today's session. And of course, by the end of today, you will be pitching like a pro, and I'm delighted to be joined by Dave. So Dave, I'll hand over control to you, and you can take over.
No worries. Thank you, Collins. Really appreciate it, and thanks everyone else for being here. I wanted to start this presentation by just quickly reflecting on the kind of pitches that I've seen in my time working with small business and medium business all over Australia, and just thinking about some of the founders that I've talked to, or some of the business development professionals that I've talked to, and some of the typical hiccups we run into. And so I thought, rather than jump into solution mode, what are some of the more common problems we're actually dealing with before we jump into solution mode, so we can start to think about how we can pitch for success, particularly in an export market. So 3 export pitching archetypes. The first is too much information. You got Mickey Mouse there sitting in a whirlpool of water. It's sort of like there's so much to say, and there's so much things you've got to organize and prioritize and think about, that it's really difficult to understand what it is that's worth saying and what's worth keeping to yourself. And more often than not, what I find is, I had one particular client say, Dave, I need 4 hours with a client to get them across the line. I thought, well, if you need 4 hours to get across the line, you're just never going to get anyone across the line, because you're asking too much upfront value without giving them any value in the first place. So how do we get over the too much information piece is really around actually understanding brevity and prioritization, which means we've got to be audience aware. So audience aware is actually about going, who am I talking to and what are their needs? And it could be that the very thing you explain to an investor is a totally different presentation to something you would explain to a potential buyer, or potentially you'd be looking at different journeys within a sales cycle and saying, if I need to pitch to someone who's going to potentially buy us, maybe there's 2 or 3 pitches, one at the start, one in the middle when you're dealing with procurement, and one at the end when you're doing onboarding. And they're totally different pieces of information, but you can prioritize and you can keep the presentation brief and you can move them along. But it's about keeping the main thing for that audience. The next one is people who are in love with their own point of view. Now, this is probably something I've become, I see on a more and more increasing basis, particularly within the engineering field. It's almost like if you've engineered a product or service, You wind up almost like a hammer looking for a nail. I think we're pretty good at trying to avoid just superfluously looking for problems to knock down. Having said that, we are pretty good at building products that haven't quite found that product market fit yet. And so what will happen is, instead of being focused on all the reasons why something is amazing, you'll be focused on all the reasons you think something is amazing. And they're very different things, because to pitch to someone why you think it's amazing will probably be product centered. And we'll be talking about all the technical specifications and all the reasons why all this work has gone into it, and why it's technically the most powerful or proficient piece of kit or solution or whatever it might be, instead of thinking about what is the value it creates in the organization you're trying to sell it into, or better yet, what is the benefit they get out of it? And can you network the benefit and the value back to what it is you're trying to sell? Chances are, if you do that, you'll be selling a lot less, and you might even be able to sell a lot less for a lot more. And so there'll be a much higher margin, but you've got to be a lot less wedded to the product, which is a bit of a hard one to do. But if you're dealing with an issue where you're finding they're just getting lost, or they're not seeing the value, or they're not quite sure what benefits them, chances are you're in love with your own point of view, and you need to be a little less product centric and a little bit more customer aware. The last one is being all over the place. And that's where you're just not quite sure what it is you need to say, or what you need to say, or where you need to start, or where you should end, or how we make that work. And that's really around clarity and focus. Can you determine for me what it is that you need to do within the market that you're trying to operate in? And can you do both the ones on the left? Can you be audience aware and brief? Can you be value specific, benefits oriented, and customer aware? And can you keep it focused? Can you keep the main thing, and not wander off too much? Again, very difficult if it's a technical product, but really important to do if it's a technical product, so that you don't get lost in the weeds, which is a really, really important piece as well. So the way you don't get lost in the weeds is by being value aware. So what is the value of this particular solution or this particular product? And can we keep all the discussions situated around value rather than around capability? Really important, not just from a product point of view, but even if you're in consulting. A lot of us will run to consulting and do massive capability statements and talk about all the reasons why they should be hired, instead of thinking about all the reasons this skill set will create value for an organization and what that means. So if we're taking something that we've built and we're wanting to take it overseas, and we're looking at how we pitch for that success, be that investors, be that potential customers, be that new customers, or potentially even just new stakeholders within an existing customer. These are three of the archetypes that I find I'm helping more often than not. So we want to maintain audience awareness, customer awareness, and value awareness. And that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to look at a bit of a brief structure for focusing on value awareness, building it around a customer awareness, and then building an audience awareness into the pitch itself, so that we can take that forward. And with that, I'll move to the next slide. There we go. So you've probably all seen this circle. It's the old classic Simon Sinek, why, how, what, golden circles, they call it, which suggests that, you know what, if we can get people to connect with why you do what you do, then how you do what you do creates a whole lot more meaning, and then what you do becomes almost irrelevant. And while I tend to agree, when it comes to pitching and people don't actually know you or your product, there's a little bit more to it. And let me explain. Effectively, what we're trying to do here is not just pitch why, how, what. We actually need to get permission to pitch why, how, what, because while it's right, part of the permission entry is to get through the gatekeepers in the first place. And the gatekeepers are looking for a what. They're looking for a solution to the problem. They're looking for someone who does a specific thing, or they're looking for a certain capability. And so the what, and eventually even the how, is actually how you start getting those conversations started. So what you're doing to address the problem becomes a really key part of the conversation. How what you do makes a difference and why that matters to you starts to shape up almost a permission to then speak to that why. And then once you can speak to that why and say, this is why it's important to you, this is how you're going to deliver it, and this is what you're going to deliver, starts to move into that space where that what becomes less important. But if we're not prepared to actually go through those 5 steps of what, how, why, how, what, then we're going to miss opportunities to get the permission to have that conversation. And we're going to potentially misset expectations or anchor the conversation in the wrong spot. And when we anchor the conversation in the wrong spot, it's very difficult to change the anchoring, particularly when you go through to procurement, and procurement believes they're buying on a certain set of aspects, and all of a sudden the questions start getting asked, and that's not the case. So if you've also run into problems with procurement or with post-sales follow-up or contracting, chances are you might have got stuck here, failing to anchor at the right spot. And it might be something that's worth looking at as well. Pitching can help all of this stuff if it's done really, really well, but you've got to understand that process of moving these skills from left to right. So what I want to do is I want to set us up with a bit of an exercise to get started. And this exercise is something I've worked with on a number of occasions. And it's, I did the same thing for the Export Hub last year. The focus I want to give to this particular conversation is around finding the value and articulating the value. But before we start there, let's start with the product. So what I want you to do is grab a piece of paper, a Post-it note, something nearby, and I want you to write down what you sell. Now, I don't want you to think about it like it's a great big solution or it's something that's almost intangible. I want you to think about, what do you put on your invoices? Is it hours? Is it a license fee? Is it a block set of hours? Is it potentially man days or bums on seats? Is it a product? Is it a rental of a product, or the purchase of plant and equipment with potentially a maintenance contract on the back of that? Whatever it might be, think about specifically what goes on that invoice with every general sale. I'm thinking generally here, so every business probably got a number of different things. So if it's products or products and services, then just write that down, but give yourself an idea of what it is that actually drives revenue into your organization. Because if we complicate that at the start, we're going to have a really difficult time unpicking this conversation. But I want you to just write down what it is you sell and how you invoice for that thing you sell. So the units with which you sell it in. And then I want you to put it to one side. The reason we're going to put it to one side is almost none of pitching is about what